The telegram arrived in London on a seemingly ordinary day in May 1985. It was a summons, a direct order for Oleg Gordievsky, the acting head of the KGB station in London, to return to Moscow immediately. The reason given was a routine consultation, a meeting to confirm his promotion to the prestigious role of resident or chief of station. To an outsider, it was the pinnacle of a long and successful career in Soviet intelligence. But Gordievsky felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He knew, with the chilling certainty of a man who had lived a double life for over a decade, that this was no ordinary meeting. It was a trap, and he was walking directly into its jaws. Despite the grave risk, he had no choice but to obey. To refuse the summons would be an open admission of guilt, a confirmation of the very secrets he had guarded so carefully. He boarded the Aeroflot flight to Moscow, a journey into the heart of the system he had betrayed. Upon his arrival, the pretense of a promotion continued for a few days, a cruel psychological game designed to lull him into a false sense of security. Then, on May 27th, he was driven not to KGB headquarters at the Lubyanka, but to a secluded dacha, a country house hidden among the silver birches outside the city. There, two senior KGB generals, including the formidable Viktor Grushko, waited for him. The atmosphere inside the dacha was thick with unspoken menace. General Grushko greeted him with a smile that did not reach his eyes and offered him a glass of fine Armenian brandy. Gordievsky, wary but needing to maintain the charade, accepted the drink. As he sipped the amber liquid, he noticed a faint, unusual taste, but it was too late. The brandy had been laced with a powerful, fast-acting truth serum, a chemical concoction designed to strip away his defenses and pry open the deepest recesses of his mind. The room began to swim, his thoughts turning to sludge. The interrogation had begun, not with questions, but with a chemical assault on his consciousness. For 5 grueling hours, the generals hammered him with accusations. They knew. Somehow, they knew he was a spy for the British. As the drug warped his perception, Gordievsky fought to cling to a single vital strategy. He remembered the story of Kim Philby, the infamous British double agent who had successfully bluffed his way through a similar interrogation years earlier. Philby had denied everything, calmly and consistently, even when faced with damning evidence. Channeling this example, Gordievsky summoned every last ounce of his training and willpower. He denied the charges. He feigned outrage. He professed his undying loyalty to the Soviet Union, even as his world dissolved around him. His performance was just convincing enough. Lacking a confession, the KGB could not execute him, but they placed him under constant, suffocating surveillance. He was a prisoner in his own country. Oleg Gordievsky was not born a traitor to the Soviet cause. He was, in fact, a product of it. His father was a dedicated officer in the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, and young Oleg grew up steeped in the ideology of the state. He was intelligent, ambitious, and destined for a career in the very organization he would one day betray. From the outside, his life was a model of Soviet success. He joined the KGB, excelled in his training, and began a promising career as a foreign intelligence officer. He was a man on the inside, privy to the secrets and operations of one of the world's most powerful and feared intelligence agencies. Yet, beneath this polished exterior of a loyal KGB man, a second identity was taking shape. For 11 years, Gordievsky had been living a secret life as a double agent, codenamed Sunbeam by his British handlers. He was working for MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service. This was not a decision made for money or personal gain, but one born from a profound and growing ideological opposition to the very system he served. He had come to see the Soviet regime not as a beacon of progress for humanity, but as a corrupt, oppressive, and fundamentally dishonest enterprise that crushed the human spirit and posed a mortal danger to the world. His decision to spy for the West was the culmination of a long and painful internal journey. He witnessed firsthand the stark contrast between the vibrant, open societies of the West and the grey, fearful atmosphere of the Soviet bloc. He saw the lies, the paranoia, and the brutality that underpinned the communist dream. He believed that by secretly feeding information to MI6, he could help the West understand the true nature of the Soviet leadership. He hoped he could act as a moderating influence, a secret channel of truth that might prevent the Cold War from escalating into a catastrophic nuclear conflict. It was an incredibly dangerous path, where a single mistake would mean certain death. This secret life required immense psychological discipline. Every day was a performance. At the Soviet embassy, he was the committed intelligence officer, analyzing reports and directing operations against the West. In clandestine meetings with his MI6 handlers in London parks and safe houses, he was the West's most valuable source inside the Kremlin, revealing Soviet secrets that shaped the policies of world leaders. For years, he balanced these two worlds, navigating a treacherous landscape of suspicion and deceit. His value to MI6 was immense, but the personal cost was a constant, gnawing strain. The summons to Moscow in 1985 signaled that this delicate balancing act was about to come crashing down. The foundation of Gordievsky's faith in the Soviet system began to crumble during his first foreign posting. In 1961, as a young KGB trainee, he was sent to East Berlin. It was there that he witnessed the construction of the Berlin Wall, a stark and brutal symbol of the regime's true nature. He watched as soldiers uncoiled barbed wire and masons laid bricks, sealing off the border between East and West. He saw families torn apart, and the desperate, hopeless faces of East Germans whose last route to freedom was being bricked up before their eyes. The official propaganda claimed the wall was an anti-fascist protective barrier, but Gordievsky saw it for what it was, the wall of a prison, built not to keep enemies out, but to keep its own citizens in. A second crucial event occurred during his posting to Denmark in the late 1960s. For the first time, Gordievsky was immersed in a free and open Western society. He could read uncensored books, listen to Western music, and speak with people who were not afraid to criticize their own government. He experienced a world of political debate, intellectual freedom, and cultural vibrancy that stood in shocking contrast to the rigid conformity and pervasive fear he had known his whole life. The experience was transformative. It exposed the lie at the heart of Soviet propaganda, which painted the West as a decadent and collapsing society. He saw that ordinary people in the West were not oppressed, but were in fact freer and more prosperous than their counterparts in the so-called workers' paradise. The final, decisive blow to his loyalty came in August 1968. From his post in Copenhagen, he watched in horror as Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia, crushing the hopeful reforms of the Prague Spring. The Czechs had dared to imagine a more humane version of socialism, one with a human face. The Soviet response was not dialogue or debate, but brute military force. For Gordievsky, this was the ultimate betrayal of socialist ideals. It proved that the Soviet system was not reformable and that its leaders would resort to any level of violence to maintain their iron grip on power. The invasion filled him with a sense of shame and disgust. These three events, the Berlin Wall, his time in Denmark, and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, acted as a powerful catalyst. They systematically dismantled the ideological framework upon which his life had been built. He could no longer reconcile the party's noble rhetoric with the regime's brutal actions. The loyalty he once felt towards the KGB and the Soviet Union curdled into a deep and profound disillusionment. He came to believe that the system was inherently evil and that his duty was no longer to serve it, but to oppose it from within. The loyal KGB officer was ready to become a spy for the other side. Gordievsky's growing disillusionment did not go unnoticed. While serving at the Soviet embassy in Copenhagen, his quiet dissent and intellectual curiosity caught the attention of Danish intelligence. They recognized the signs of a man whose loyalty to Moscow was wavering. The Danes, in turn, shared their sensitive observations with their close allies in Britain's MI6. The British were intrigued. A high-ranking KGB officer with access to the inner workings of Soviet intelligence, who was also ideologically motivated to cooperate, was the ultimate prize in the shadowy world of espionage. The delicate process of recruitment began, a careful dance of approach and assessment. The initial approach was made through a trusted friend, a contact who could test the waters without revealing the full hand of a major Western intelligence service. Once Gordievsky signaled a willingness to talk, MI6 stepped in. His first official handler was Richard Bromhead, the MI6 station chief in Copenhagen. Their meetings were clandestine and fraught with risk. They developed a system of signals, dead drops, and secret meeting places to avoid the ever-watchful eyes of the KGB's internal security. It was in these hushed conversations that Gordievsky officially crossed the line, agreeing to provide intelligence to the British. He was motivated not by promises of wealth, but by a shared conviction that the Soviet threat needed to be contained. For several years in Denmark, Gordievsky operated as a highly productive agent. He supplied MI6 with a treasure trove of information about KGB operations in Scandinavia and beyond. He revealed the identities of Soviet spies and exposed their methods of recruitment and communication. His intelligence was of exceptional quality because he was not just reporting on gossip or low-level chatter. He was providing authentic documents and first-hand knowledge from inside the KGB's European network. He was a window into the mind of the enemy, allowing the West to see how the KGB thought, planned, and acted on a daily basis. His success in Copenhagen led to a promotion that would make him even more valuable to the West. In 1982, the KGB, unaware of his treachery, posted him to London, one of the most important centers of Cold War espionage. He was later promoted to become the resident, the head of the entire KGB network in Great Britain. This was an astonishing coup for MI6. Their man was now in charge of all Soviet intelligence operations in their own backyard. From his office in the Soviet embassy, Gordievsky had access to the most sensitive secrets flowing between London and Moscow. The stakes were now higher than ever, and the intelligence he would provide would soon prove to be of world-altering importance. When I arrived in London in 1982 to take up my post at the Soviet embassy, I stepped right into the epicenter of the Cold War's intelligence battle. As the acting resident, I was responsible for overseeing all KGB espionage activities in the United Kingdom. This, honestly, gave me unprecedented access to the Kremlin's deepest secrets and strategic intentions. For MI6, it was as if they had placed a microphone inside the most secret room in Moscow. I was able to hand over entire files detailing Soviet agent networks, technical surveillance methods, and the identities of spies operating under deep cover across Europe. My information was, well, a river of pure gold for Western intelligence agencies. One of my most significant contributions was exposing spies who had managed to penetrate Western governments and intelligence services. I unmasked Arne Treholt, a high-ranking Norwegian diplomat who had been selling NATO secrets to the KGB for years. I also identified Michael Bettany, an officer within Britain's own MI5 who was attempting to sell secrets to the Soviets. Thanks to my timely warning, Bettany was caught before he could do any serious damage. These successes not only neutralized immediate threats, but also helped MI6 and its allies understand the KGB's recruitment tactics, allowing them to build better defenses against future penetration attempts. Beyond exposing individual agents, I provided invaluable political intelligence. I offered a unique perspective on the mindset of the Soviet leadership, which at the time was aging, paranoid, and deeply fearful of the West. I explained to my British handlers that the men in the Kremlin, led by the former KGB chief Yuri Andropov, genuinely believed that the United States, under President Ronald Reagan, was preparing to launch a surprise nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. This was not posturing for political effect. It was a real and dangerous paranoia that was driving Soviet military and political strategy. This insight was crucial for Western leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. I also provided early and accurate intelligence on a rising star within the Communist Party, Mikhail Gorbachev. Long before Gorbachev became a household name, I was telling MI6 that he was a different kind of Soviet leader. I described Gorbachev as a genuine reformer, a man who understood the deep systemic problems facing the Soviet Union and was willing to consider radical changes. This information helped shape the West's approach, encouraging them to engage with Gorbachev when he eventually came to power. My reporting allowed Thatcher and Reagan to see Gorbachev not as just another hardliner, but as a man they could, in Thatcher's famous words, do business with. In November 1983, the world unknowingly teetered on the edge of nuclear annihilation, and I was the man who saw it coming. NATO was conducting a major military exercise codenamed Able Archer 83. From the Western perspective, it was just a routine drill, a command post simulation designed to test the procedures for releasing nuclear weapons in the event of a war. The exercise was highly realistic, involving new communication protocols, radio silences, and the movement of senior leaders, including Prime Minister Thatcher and President Reagan. To the West, it was a game, but in Moscow, it was viewed with extreme alarm. From my privileged position inside the London residentura, I had access to the frantic top-secret telegrams flowing between Moscow and KGB stations across Europe. I saw that the paranoid Soviet leadership, under Yuri Andropov, had misinterpreted the exercise. They genuinely believed that Able Archer 83 was not a drill, but a cover for a real, imminent nuclear first strike by NATO. The KGB sent out an urgent flash message to all its stations, ordering them to look for any signs that the West was preparing for war, lights on late at military bases, unusual movements of personnel, or blood drives. The paranoia had reached a fever pitch. The intelligence I read was terrifying. I learned that in response to the perceived threat, the Soviet Union was placing its own nuclear forces on high alert. Nuclear-capable aircraft in East Germany and Poland were being armed, and missile crews were being readied for immediate launch. The world was closer to nuclear war than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, yet the West was completely unaware of the danger. They were playing a war game, oblivious to the fact that the other side thought the war was real. The situation was a catastrophic misunderstanding, fueled by years of mistrust and Kremlin paranoia. Recognizing the immense danger, I knew I had to act. I made an urgent request for a meeting with my MI6 handlers. In a tense, secret encounter in a London safe house, I laid out the stark reality of the situation. I explained that the Soviets were not bluffing, and that any further escalation by NATO, however unintentional, could trigger a Soviet preemptive strike. This was, without a doubt, the single most important piece of intelligence of my career. MI6 immediately relayed the warning to the highest levels of the British government, and from there it was passed directly to the CIA and President Reagan. The warning from the spy in London had reached the leaders of the free world, just in the nick of time. After my harrowing interrogation in the Moscow dacha in May 1985, I knew my time was running out. Although I had been released, I was under intense KGB surveillance. Teams of agents followed me everywhere, my apartment was bugged, and my every move was scrutinized. I was a dead man walking, just waiting for the moment the KGB would gather enough evidence to arrest and execute me. My only hope was a daring and incredibly risky escape plan that I had worked out with MI 6 years earlier. A plan codenamed Operation Pimlico. It was a last resort, to be used only in the most desperate of circumstances. That time had now come. The plan was a masterpiece of classic espionage tradecraft, relying on a series of subtle signals to activate the escape. The first signal was for me. To trigger the operation, I had to appear at a specific spot on a Moscow street at a specific time, carrying a Safeway supermarket bag. An MI6 officer, acting as a recognizer, would then walk past me carrying a Harrods bag and eating a Mars bar. This seemingly random encounter would confirm that the message had been received and that MI6 was putting the escape into motion. It was a simple, almost mundane set of actions, but upon them hung the life of the West's most valuable agent. On Tuesday, July 16, 1985, I put the plan into action. I slipped out of my apartment for my daily jog, managing to get to the designated street corner. With my heart pounding, I stood there, clutching the plastic Safeway bag. The minutes ticked by. My handler was 15 minutes late, an agonizing delay that felt like an eternity. Just as I was about to give up hope, I saw him, a British diplomat strolling casually down the street, munching on a Mars bar and carrying the distinctive green and gold Harrods bag. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. The signal was given. The operation was on. I now had to wait until Friday for the next and most dangerous phase of the plan. The escape itself was scheduled for Friday, July 19th. The plan called for me to evade my KGB watchers in Moscow, a feat that required immense nerve and precision timing. I was to take a train north to the city of Leningrad, and from there, travel to a pre-arranged rendezvous point near the Finnish border. A car with diplomatic plates, driven by MI6 agents from the British Embassy in Helsinki, would be waiting for me. They would then attempt to smuggle me across the heavily guarded Soviet-Finnish border. The plan was audacious and had been given only a 1 in 5 chance of success by MI6 planners. It had been personally approved by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who knew the immense value of the man they were trying to save. On the morning of Friday, July 19th, I began the most important run of my life. I left my Moscow apartment in my jogging clothes, knowing my ever-present KGB surveillance team would follow. I had to shake them. I ran my usual route, but then, at a precise moment, I ducked behind a line of trees and sprinted, changing direction and disappearing into the vastness of the city. I managed to get to the train station undetected, where I bought a ticket not for Leningrad, but for a stop just beyond it. A small detail to confuse anyone checking manifests. I boarded the train, a fugitive in my own country, my journey to freedom finally underway. I arrived in Leningrad and followed my instructions, taking another train and then a bus to a remote patch of forest near the city of Zelenogorsk. As dusk began to fall, I waited by the roadside, hidden in the trees. The minutes crawled by. Finally, I saw the headlights of 2 cars. It was the MI6 team. The lead car, a Ford Sierra, pulled over. The door opened, and the Moscow station chief, Roy Ascot, ushered me in. Without a word, I climbed into the trunk of the car, which had been specially prepared for me. The lid closed, plunging me into darkness. For the next several hours, my fate would be entirely in the hands of my British rescuers. The drive to the Finnish border was nerve-wracking. The team used every trick they could to avoid suspicion. One of the MI6 officers' wives was in the car with her baby, creating the perfect image of a diplomatic family out for a drive. As we approached the Soviet checkpoint, the tension was unbearable. The guards were meticulous, checking passports and peering into the car. A sniffer dog was brought out, trained to detect human scent. Just as the dog neared the trunk, the MI6 officer's wife executed a brilliant diversion. She claimed her baby had a soiled diaper, and in a moment of planned clumsiness, dropped it near the dog, distracting it with the powerful smell. The guards, annoyed and eager to get the smelly diaper away from their post, waved the car through. The team had passed the Soviet checkpoint. We drove on to the Finnish side, where we were on safe territory. They pulled over, and the trunk was opened. Cramped and drenched in sweat, I crawled out into the fresh, clean air of Finland. I was free. I had defied the KGB, escaped from the heart of the Soviet Empire, and completed one of the most audacious and successful exfiltration operations of the entire Cold War. The spy who had risked everything for the West had finally come in from the cold. After my dramatic escape, I began a new life in Britain, but my old life cast a long shadow. The Soviet Union sentenced me to death in absentia for treason, a sentence that was never rescinded by modern Russia. I lived under the protection of the British security services in a safe house in the London suburbs, always aware that I was a marked man. When I had fled Moscow, I had been forced to leave behind my wife Leila and our 2 young daughters. I had not told them about my secret life, and my sudden disappearance was a profound betrayal from which our relationship would never recover. 2 of my greatest champions, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and President Ronald Reagan, took a personal interest in my case. They repeatedly raised the issue of my family with the Soviet leadership, applying sustained diplomatic pressure. For 6 long years, Moscow refused. Finally, in 1991, as the Soviet Union was crumbling, Mikhail Gorbachev relented and allowed Leila and the children to leave. The reunion in London was bittersweet. The years of separation and the shock of my deception had created a gulf that could not be bridged. The marriage soon ended, a painful personal cost for my service to the West. Despite the personal hardships, I built a productive new life. I became a celebrated author, co-writing books like The KGB, The Inside Story, and my own memoir, Next Stop Execution. I was a frequent commentator on Russian affairs and a trusted advisor to Western governments. In 2007, my service to my adopted country was formally recognized when Queen Elizabeth II appointed me a Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, a high honor for services to UK security. I remained a vocal critic of the Kremlin, and in 2007, I believed I was the target of a poisoning attempt, a chilling reminder that old enemies never forgot. I passed away peacefully in England on March 4, 2025, at the age of 86. My death marked the end of an era, closing a final chapter of the Cold War. My legacy is one of quiet courage and profound impact. The intelligence I provided did more than just expose spies. It gave the West a vital understanding of the paranoid mindset within the Kremlin. My timely warning during the Able Archer 83 crisis is widely credited with preventing a misunderstanding from spiraling into a nuclear war. In a world of shadows and deceit, I was a spy who acted out of conscience. And in doing so, I helped make the world a safer place for everyone.